Hello everybody. Today I want to start teaching you on Python, one of the most leading languages within the world. So first of all, I'm going to show you how to install Python from the website. And then after installing the Python, we will go through writing some codes, initiating writing some codes on how to define arrays and how to work with these arrays too, and then how to do some algebra within these arrays. Okay, let's go. In order to install Python, the best reference is the python.org website. So you can freely go to this website and on downloads tab, you can find different releases based on different operation system and also with different versions of the Python, or even you can update your Python through this website too. The the amount that it's gonna take on your hard drive would be very less compared to other coding softwares like MATLAB or C. And then when you install the software, you can go through the start menu and then select Python and then initiate writing your codes within the software. In order to initiate writing codes within the Python, I should first go through the definition of arrays. Arrays technically are a complete complex of elements which can be one-dimensional to either n-dimensional. So the thing that you have to know from arrays, you should know the dimensions of these arrays, the name of the array, the points to go to each indices of the array, and then assign different parameters, different values, and you can do different algebra through the code that we are gonna do this together later in this training. When you open Python shell, a new box pops up. Within that box, you can see the version of the Python that you are using, which is now 2.7.11 shell. And then here, in order to define arrays, we'll go start using some lists to do that. Technically, the lists are arrays, and we can define any list with different arrays and with different sizes, different indices, and everything together. The most important characteristics of lists is that they are assumed to be dynamic. That means that all of their values, all of their indices can be changed through the codes. So to begin with array, we first start with its name, which now is array, equal to two brackets, which is the syntax form of the definition of lists in here. Then we should define its elements, which is based on their types or their sizes, the numbers of these elements, and then at this point we can completely define this array. These elements are separated with a comma in between them. And then I want to put numbers, like for example here I want to use odd numbers to define my array. By hitting enter button on your keyboard, the definition is completed. And then just by typing the name of the array, you can have its elements as the answer of the software. Now by using the function len, which shows the length of the array, you can have the number of elements within that array, which now is 6. And you should remember that the indices number starts from 0. So now if you want to point to each element, each index within that array, you should start with 0 to 5. For example, here number 3 is has the index of number 1. In order to have access to each element within that array, is just using the name of the array and then the index number within that array. For example, here if I type ARY and within a bracket I type 1, that means that I'm pointing to array which has the index number 1. The answer should be 3. So if you want to have access to the few elements of within that array, for example, here if you want to have the indices from the first 3 indices of this array, is just need to write ARY bracket these dots up to 3. That means that the first 3 elements of the array should be the answer. Even each part of this assigning, you can assign this to a new array. For example, here if I type ARY2 equal to ARY to the first 4 elements of this array, you can clearly see that 1, 3, 5, 7, which are the first 4 elements of the array, assigned to ARY2. And by showing the ARY2 as a result, you can clearly see what the elements are assigned to this new array. As I told you before, since array are kind of lists and its elements are dynamic, we can assign and replace new values to their indices. For example, here if I assign number 4 to index number 1, which is 3, I can easily type ARY within the bracket 1 equal to 4, and then if I declare ARY, I can clearly see that the 3 is replaced by 4, and a new array comes out. Or even you can replay a few numbers of array within that actually the dynamic characteristics of the list. For example, if I want to replace arrays between 1 and 3 equal to 12 and 13, so I can easily type this code, and then when I declare ARY, you can see the second and the third elements of this array are replaced by 12 and 13. In order to find the maximum of an array, here we have a small numbers of elements within that array, so that's very easy to find out. But if you have a large array, it's very difficult, and even with the addition of dynamic characteristic of the array, so it's very hard to get the maximum value. For here, it's easy just to write a for in loop in the code. So before that, we will define x as 0 and then write the syntax for a for loop. Here for I in array, and if x is less than I, put x equal to I, and then when I type print x to get the value of x, you can clearly see the 13 is the value. That means that by getting a very small for loop, you can get the maximum value within that array. As you can see, by simply writing any function within that loop, you can get the maximum value of that array. Another method to find the maximum of an array is using the range function. As you remember, range function, the input for the range function is a value, is a number. So here, when you are gonna write a for in loop in here, so you should say range the number, which is the length of the array that you already defined, and then when you're gonna write an if function in here, if x is less than array number I, which shows the index of I, then put x equal to ARY with the index of I. And then when I return the function the x value that gonna give me 13 again. So far, each arrays that we already defined are one-dimensional within the two brackets. So that means that each row or each dimension within one pair of brackets show a one-dimensional array. We also can define arrays within a loop function, like a for in. To do so, we first should define a void array. We call this list. And then we use for in loop in here. And we write for I in list. Remember here, we define list with the capital L. And because there is a function list in Python with a small l. So if you write list with a small l, it will be conflicted with the other function in the Python, and you will definitely get an error on this. So here, since we define the list array as a void array, so technically there is no indices within that. So when I put it as a as a final value in the for in loop, that means technically nothing. So I have to define something like a range function that can define the number of arrays that we are going to put in the number of indices that we are going to put in list. So here I will use function range, and I put 20 in this. That means that the range between 0 and 19. So in the next line, if I use list again to be equal to 3, that means that I wanted to have all of these indices, all of these elements to be 3. I will again get an error because list is still is a void array without any indices. So the way I am defining this is wrong. So instead, I have to use a method, we call this append, to assign each number to the values of this array. So here I will write list.append, and since I want to put number 3 to all of these elements, so I just write 3 within the parentheses, and then everything should be fine. Then, as you can see, if I recall array list by typing print list, you can clearly see that you will have an array with number 3 as all of its elements from 0 to 19. That means it has a length of 20. We also again have access to all of its elements, and we can replace each element to any value that we want with the previously defined, for example here, list within the brackets 5. That means that go to the elements number 5 and then replace the number with 4. And as you can see, the new array becomes like this. And you should remember that indices starts from 0. So when I write list 5, that means go to the 6 elements, which is here replaced by number 4. Another way to define an array with a fixed number for each element is that, for example, I can define another array list 1, and I want to put number 0 to all of each elements. We can define the for in loop within the brackets. For example, here I will write list 1 equal to 0. This is the value that I want to put to all of its elements, and write the for in loop, which is for I in, and the number of elements, which I should use range function, and I want to have 30 elements within that array, so I should say range between the two parentheses number 30. And then when I recall list one, you can see that I have an array with 0 for each element, and the length should be 30. And then I can replace each of these elements with any number and do whatever I want. Also, another way is that I can type an equation within the brackets to define my array. For example, here, if I want to put each value to each indices is to be equal to a square of the index number, I should write I times I, which is square I, for I in the range, and I should write in here the number of elements that I want, which is 5 now here. And when I recall list 2 again in here, you can see 0, 1, 4, 9, 16, which corresponds to the square of the index number. For example, the index number for 0 is 0, for 1 is 1, the 2 is 4, the 3 is 9, and the 4 is 16. And that's how we can define in different ways for arrays. So now we can move to define different dimensional arrays. For example, if I want to define a two-dimensional array, I should write, for example, in here, array equal to, I should first write the two brackets which shows the whole array. And within these brackets, I should write another pair of brackets for each dimension. For example, if I want to have a two-dimensional array, I should write a pair of brackets, comma, and another pair of brackets. Now I can clearly define a 2D array. Then I can put any number within these brackets, and if I recall array, we can clearly see how it works. And you should remember that each pair of brackets will have one index. For example, if I recall array with the index number 0, I will get the first pair brackets which shows 3 and 4. And then if I want to go forward to have access to each elements within the first index, I should put another index which is usual in all of the languages. When you have a two-dimensional array, which is kind of matrix, you will have I and j, which shows the column and row of that index. And here, when you write 0, you will go through the first element, first pair of actually brackets, and then by writing number 1 after that, you will go to the index number 1, which gonna be the second elements within that brackets. So by this way, you can have access to all of the uh, indexes or elements within a two-dimensional array, or even you can have it more, and then well, definitely you will get three-dimensional, you will have I, J, and K, and then definitely clearly you can define an array with different dimensions, and you can have access to each specific elements within that array. Although you can assign different values to each element or replace them. For example, here, if I want to replace 4 by 7 and then recall array 2, you can see that the 7 is here instead of 4. And if I want to get the length of the array by using len function, you will get 2 because each pair of brackets will be 1. So you will have 2 as the length of this array. And technically, the len function in here are showing the number of dimensions. Here we have a two-dimensional array, and the output for len function should be 2. Also, we can have the same setup to define every actually dimension within that array. By putting a for in each pair of brackets, you can define each dimension within that array. Here, by writing array1 equal to this code, which is in the first bracket, I am defining 1. I want to repeat the number 1 5 times, so I should write 1 for j in range 5. And then I close the bracket. And then I use another for, which is in the main bracket. You can see in here. And I use another variable in here. Then when I use this within the main bracket, I am technically defining the number of dimensions within that array. That means that for I in range 2, you should the first pair of brackets should repeat it 2 times. That means that the number 2 within the second range function shows the number of dimensions within that array. And if I recall array 1 again, you can clearly see that this array has 2 dimensions, and within each dimension I have number 1, which is repeated 5 times. So that's easy. In order to define a three-dimensional array, you will have three pairs of brackets, which is separated with a comma. And if you want to have this in a loop format, that should be used when you want to have the same value for each indices. You can follow this code. So you can clearly write in the first bracket 1, which is the number that I want to repeat it, for j in range 5, 5 times in each dimension, and then for I in range 3, that 3 means that I want to have a three-dimensional array, and clearly the first part should be repeated 3 times and makes a new 3D array. Then I can print array 3 new in here, and you can clearly see I have 3 pairs of brackets, and then which the number 1 is repeated in here, and then I can increase the dimension within the array just by changing the number of 3 to 6 in the second range function, and that's easy. And when I use the length function, which shows the length of the array, that's gonna be 6, which technically, as I told you before, is the number of dimension that we have within that array. So if I want to have the type of these arrays that I'm using this by typing type function, I can get the answer that the types of all of these arrays are list. So this is the first basic review of Python just by defining arrays in here and working with different elements and things, definition of the arrays. So we'll continue for the next training.